Shadowheart gently helped Simon back into his robes, her eyes wide with wonder.
That was a prophecy, wasn't it?
Shadowheart asked softly. She had seen great works performed by the priests of Shar, and could even perform some minor miracles herself, but the gift of prophecy was rare indeed. To be present for one's speaking was an honor. It was. Instructions from my lord, Simon said, still holding his pack somewhat gingerly off his back. Abderek healed him, yes, but much like his own divine magic, Abderek's was not meant to undo harm. But if you ask Gale, it's not a prophecy because I intend to work to fulfill it, Simon muttered.
Well, Gale didn't hear you, Shadowheart replied. That was amazing. Truly glorious. I can only imagine what it must sound like in your temple, she said, breathless with reverence.
Perhaps someday you'll hear, Simon suggested, offering a small smile. Come on, guys. We've got to find out how many prisoners they've got here. See if Will's dad's with them or if he's already been shipped off, Karlach whispered.
Pardon me. Excuse me. You're there. Good sirs,
came a stage whisper from the farthest cell. Shadowheart poked her head inside the darkened cell and frowned.
Oh, it's you,
Shadowheart said flatly, eyes flicking from the bearded face of Volo to the ridiculous hat.
Indeed it is,
Volo cried before quieting himself.
Indeed it is. You know, you all seem to be walking about quite freely.
We have our ways,
Shadowheart said, casually flicking her braid over her shoulder with an air of complete superiority.
Yes, and while I have enjoyed my time among the goblins here and found endless topics to write about, I worry my host's patience with me is wearing thin. When I told them I didn't want to convert but merely record, they locked me up as quick as you please, and I'd run completely through my repertoire of goblin songs by the end of my first day. At this point, my only hopes for escaping this cage are either you fine folk committing an act of daring do, or marrying my captor.
You what? Karlach asked, brows rising.
Oh, how repugnant,
Astarion remarked, though his lips were twisted in a sadistic grin.
I admit I'm fascinated to learn about goblin wedding customs, but perhaps in a more accommodating venue?
Volo laughed nervously.
Really, though,
he continued, his tone growing as grave as it could,
I've seen them bringing prisoners up from the dungeons to interrogate them about the Druid Grove in some sort of weapon, and fewer are being returned to the cells as of late. And I'm quite certain it's not from a sudden turn of mercy. If these absolutists find out I've been there, I shudder to think.
You don't honestly think we're going to free you?
Shadowheart asked, raising a brow.
Well, I'd rather hoped I could throw myself upon your mercy, and spirit of goodwill, cooperation, and adventure would move you,
Volo said, his pleading gaze switching from Shadowheart and Astarion towards Karlach and Simon.
Oh, come on, then, we can get him out,
Karlach said. I may not like his music, but he doesn't deserve to be tortured to death over it.
You do stick out like a sore thumb, sir,
Simon said, wincing slightly as he tried to soften his statement.
If we release you, they'll throw you right back in here, and we can hardly take you with us as we explore this camp. Oh, you needn't worry about that. A potion of invisibility is most effective in times such as these,
Volo grinned, reaching up into his crumpled hat and pulling out a small flask.
What? You've had a potion of invisibility this whole time? Why ain't you used it?
Karlach asked, leaning closer.
Well, I've never had the opportunity to slip away unnoticed, Volo said. The only time I'm not under guard is, well, when I'm left here with the potatoes, which hardly make good accomplices. And even then, my captor, the singular Miss Gribbo, is often here to listen to my first drafts of ballads celebrating the true souls, and to prod at me with a long stick when I've fallen asleep before finishing, he added. Though with your intervention, I might yet be free of this cage.
Prove you can turn invisible and we'll set you free, Simon said. We're trying to lie low. We can't have any mistakes.
Why, certainly,
Volo smiled, pulling the cork out of the flask's mouth with a satisfying pop and swigging the liquid. Within moments, Volo began to disappear, starting with his stomach and rippling outward.
Am I sufficiently translucent for you, sir? Astarion, the lock, if you please, Simon said, gesturing to the crude padlock. Now we'll just see if a bard can be tacit, Astarion muttered, his lockpicks working quietly. Once we've got you out of here, sneak out the front door when one of the newly branded goblins leaves to go back to the party. Then seek out our camp for safekeeping.
Our camp?
Shadowheart asked, incredulous.
We've already sent too many to the grove, Simon said, and if his potion wears off, we don't want him to be tracked back to them.
The lock clicked open, and Astarion slid it from the cage door.
Easy,
he smirked.
Excellent!
Volo stage whispered once again, his voice emanating from inside the cage.
Perhaps when all this is over, we can share a libation while you tell me what else you find here for my records. For now, I bid you adieu.
Any sound of boots on the stone floor was lost under cries from the torture room and goblins being branded in the main sanctuary. Astarion swung the cage door shut behind Volo and relocked it.
Might as well leave them with a mystery, he said puckishly.
The temple had many twists and turns, some original to the building, others the result of the sudden deluge breaking stone and opening sinkholes in the floors. Several giant spiders were kept in a pit topped with a jerry-rigged wooden lattice to keep them corralled, though the spiders chittered and clacked their enormous pincers all the same.
Ugh, can we get out of here soon? They're giving me the willies,
Karlach complained.
Pretty sure that spider pit's where those prisoners end up if they don't talk.
How many are there? Simon asked. Karlach listened for a moment, her face screwed up in concentration. I hear 3 voices, but they all keep talking over each other. Could be 4, maybe 2 just sound alike.
Well, where there's giant spiders, there's drow,
Shadowheart murmured, nodding to one of the drow guards standing by the edge of the pit, twice the height of his goblin counterpart. He was tall and elegant. Simon knew he must have been well fed in the Underdark to reach that height. A noble scion, perhaps? A favored consort? Simon quickly realized most of the drow he saw moving about the temple were men. Not surprising. Serving the Absolute almost certainly offered them a better life than Lolth did for them. Simon felt a light pang in his chest at the thought. His own butler was a devoted, if secret, servant of the Dark Dancer after his centuries below. Oh, how Historivir had wept for joy when he heard her song again in the chaos of the Second Sundering.
"Come along, darling," Astarion whispered. "Don't be suspicious."
A rickety bridge and scaffold spanning a crevasse led down to what looked to be a thoroughly looted and defaced crypt, with ropes and ladders leading up to the top of a partially collapsed wall where rats and goblins scampered up and over. The whole temple had become a twisted hive of sacrilege. Shadowheart wore a haughty smirk as they strode through the defiled crypt, but Simon noticed a tension in her frame.
"Whew! Something smells rank,"
Karlach remarked, looking toward a pair of doors, barely clinging to their hinges. The iron bands and hinges of the double doors were rusted rich red, and the wood had grown layers of salts on its outside, giving them the appearance of bloodied skeletons joining the others in the crypt. Carved into the stone above the doors was an exhortation, "Pass the light of knowledge, lest this too shall pass."
Volo said prisoners were being brought past his cage. That seems a likely prison, Simon said.
"Smells more like a pigsty to me," Karlach said.
"Prisons aren't meant to smell like a prize rose garden,"
Astarion scoffed, though his nose too was wrinkled.
"Though perhaps the next place we go could be somewhere more pleasing to the nose," he whined, turning to Simon. "Your blood sharpens all my senses, darling."
"We smell it too, you're not special,"
Shadowheart muttered, stepping forward to pull on the rings of the doors. The creaking and groaning of the hinges ordinarily would have been an alarm, but among the cheers in the main hall every time a brand was applied, the shrieks echoing from the torture chamber, and the chittering of massive, dripping spider fangs, the protestations of the door were lost. The full stench from the room beyond hit Simon like a punch. Ammonia stung his eyes. The smell of rotting meat and animal mess hung thick in the air and tried to crawl inside his mouth like so many maggots. and the mouldering scent of wet fur felt like a scum beginning to coat any exposed skin. It was hard to see with how rank the air was, and the sounds of animals deeper inside seemed to simply be a part of the stink.
"I'm going to be sick,"
Astarion mumbled, his hands clapped over his nose and mouth.
Do it over there, then,"
Karlach said, trying to wave him off. Reluctantly, the four crept farther into the dungeon, their boots sticking slightly to the ochre-tinted floor. The hallway quickly opened into what was once a space for study, judging by the mouldering remnants of books in the hastily converted prison cells. The scent of human misery was quickly added to the potpourri, sweat and blood and vomit. Simon's stomach began churning for another reason. These men, Aradin's men, they'd been here for days. Simon had left them there for days. To be tortured, to fester, to rot.
"I think Gale will forgive us for not bringing back any of the books that are still left in this pigsty,"
Shadowheart said, peering for a moment into one of the long-abandoned library chambers. The pages of the surviving books rippled from water damage.
"If he wants them, he can collect them himself,"
Astarion agreed.
"I'm not laying a finger on anything in here until it's been brutally washed."
"Quiet," Simon instructed, his tone grave as he slowly strode forward into the larger chamber, lit with meager torchlight. Several goblins were milling about. One with a large cleaver was chopping into a suspiciously sized and furless side of meat, another pair standing near a much larger cell where the glittering eyes of wargs glinted in the dark inside. Every now and then as they conversed they would hurl a hunk of bloody meat inside. The wargs would snap and snarl at one another. The goblins would whack the bars with a big stick, and the process would repeat. The next large pan also had an audience, 2 goblins and their irritated elder minder.
"Do it again! Do it again!"
One of them shrieked in excitement. The other hefted up a large chunk of broken stonework and, tongue between their cheek, hucked it at the enormous furry mass inside the cell. The roar it let out was no warg howl. The goblins had captured a bear.
"Guys,"
Karlach said lowly, touching Simon lightly on the arm.
"Something's not right. That's not a bear."
"What do you mean?" Simon asked, looking from her to the enormous furry creature inside the cage.
"That looks more like a bear than anything I've ever seen. I know animals, soldier. Talk to 'em and everything. But this one's all garbled. I bet my life on it that's a shapeshifter," she said.
"A shapeshifter?" Simon repeated, frowning slightly. "A druid?" he continued, giving her a significant look. If this was the druid they were searching for.
"Most likely,"
she whispered back, nodding.
"How do we get him out?"
Shadowheart whispered, her expression oddly sympathetic as she watched the bear flinch away from another rock, though it continued growling and snarling threateningly.
"Oi, you lot! The hell's you doing in here?"
The butcher yelled, brandishing his cleaver at them accusingly.
"Inspection,"
Astarion called after a moment, the first to speak up.
"I never had no inspection before,"
the goblin said, approaching with his bloody knife in hand.
"A trousseau business. I suggest you mind yours,"
Astarion said, looking down his nose at the goblin.
"Never seen you lot before. How'd you get blessed before us?" he growled. "Lithrin, you must do something."
The not-quite voice of Simon's not-quite butler rang in his mind as he watched the confrontation from the corner of his eye.
"He's going to sound the alarm. Take control. I know you can."
"We were sent by the chosen of the Absolute," Simon said, his voice rich with the power and ease that only comes with wearing a crown. The youths fell to their knees in deference, as did one of the warg riders, dropping the dripping meat on the filthy floor. Simon strode closer to the butcher, clearly unintimidated.
If you doubt my authority, then by all means spit upon me and walk out. But if you recognize your priests and prophets, then kneel, Simon ordered, his voice booming with authority. At once the butcher fell to his knees, the other rider, the nanny, watching the goblins. Knee after knee bent as his command was focused through the worm and pierced their collective subconscious like an arrow from a war bow. Another set of knees hit the disgusting stone floor instinctively at Simon's command. Astarion almost didn't understand why he was looking at the floor when just a moment before he'd been haughtily looking down at a goblin. Master commands. Do his master commands before he compels. I'm sorry, master. Astarion rose from where he'd knelt, his expression sour as he tried to force those pitiful, weak, sobbing memories back where they belonged, in the darkest corners of the tomb. To his delight, the goblins remained penitently, compulsively bowed. That wasn't him anymore. No. Never again. Never again. Simon turned towards the animal cages at the back of the room, drumming his fingers on a decayed old banister running along the raised platform before the lower floor of the room. It's not right for such majestic creatures to be locked up, he declared, glancing back at the others for a moment, though his gaze lingered on Astarion. A darkness flitted across Astarion's face, and he nodded, grinning. "Open the cages," Simon commanded, looking down at the warg rider who carried the sharp stick. The one the wargs eyed maliciously. "What?" the goblin squeaked. But they ain't trained yet." "Now who's going to reap the whirlwind for that?" Simon asked. "And that's a bear! Your Holiness, it's dangerous!" "I know what it is," Simon declared, looking at the caged bear for a long moment, hoping the druid understood. "Shall we demonstrate our faith?" Simon asked, slowly descending the broken marble steps to the well of the room and grasping the lever for the cage door. He focused on the bear, growling lowly and huffing its hot breath in his face. Simon locked eyes with the creature and offered a sly wink before nodding ever so slightly towards the nanny who'd been instructing the goblins on proper rock-throwing technique just minutes before. With a grunt, Simon pulled the lever and stepped back as the door creaked open, the bear inside roaring, but taking only calm steps forward. "Is your faith so weak?" Simon called over to the other goblins, willfully and obviously turning his back to the beast. "Are you deserving of that mark?" he asked, openly goading them. Frustrated, and still somewhat shaken from being forced to kneel, the goblin grabbed the lever to the warg cage and pulled. The door began to creak open, only for the wargs inside to slam against the grate, forcing the doors open wide and bursting forth. The goblin at the lever shrieked as he was snatched up by strong wolf-like jaws and shaken like a rag doll. The other warg pounced on the still kneeling rider, the scent of that bloody meat thick in the warg's nose. "I guess not," Simon smirked, chuckling. "What's all this ruckus?" a vaguely familiar goblin's voice called as the pack of goblins from the torture room entered, dragging the beaten and half-conscious man from the rack after them. At the sound of high-pitched cries of terror, the goblins unceremoniously dropped their victim and charged forward, iron pokers and spears raised as they threw themselves into the fray. "Shadowheart, bar the door," Simon called, reaching for his staff. A few goblins were fine, but the risk of alerting the rest of the temple was growing by the second. "Yeah, don't let him escape!" one of the goblins yelled, grabbing a torch and charging down into the bloodthirsty wargs. "Oh no, wouldn't want that," Shadowheart overstated, gesturing as though she were on stage before running to shut the ancient doors. "Check on the prisoner, too," Simon whispered into Shadowheart's earring, the words coming through clear as a bell in spite of the echoing chaos. "All of them." "If you insist," Shadowheart replied, slightly bewildered and a touch disappointed at not being able to rejoin the fight right away.
Karlak, Simon called through the earrings over the din as the bear snarled over Simon's shoulder at the approaching goblins. Can you get the wargs to join us? Oi, Fuzzies! You in with us or not? Karlak called, axe drawn as she waded into the fray, goblins piling onto the wargs with battle frenzy. Oh, rude! You better pull it. Oh, Simon, I'm afraid we're gonna have to kill these guys, she growled. With a whistling call that shook the weave, one of the goblins roughly hewed the shape of a giant spider into the material plane. Like all summoned creatures, it was the platonic ideal of a spider. Enormous, spindly legs, shiny black and yellow carapace, dripping fangs the size of a child's arm, and 8 massive, heartless eyes. With a chittering squeal, it scuttled across the floor, adding to the chaos of the moment. Glak, yes, Simon incanted calmly, gathering the moisture in the air and hurling the resulting shards into the scrum. 1, 3, run! Tell the others! The minder barked at the goblins. Both stood for a moment, trembling in fear of the scene unfolding before them, but when the bear turned its massive bulk towards them and brought its paws down on the minder for a deadly blow, the goblins pushed into a dead sprint for the door. Astarion quickly nocked an arrow and let loose, slaying one of the fleeing goblins before they could even reach the hallway. Incende! Shadowheart cried from down the hall, followed by the wet thunk from her mace. Oi! Oi! Get us out of here! One of the bruised prisoners begged, stumbling to the cell door and rattling it, joined moments later by the other prisoners shouting and shaking their chains. Shut up! Give us a bloody minute! Shadowheart snapped, her magic working over the abandoned man on the floor. His head groggily lifted up from the disgusting floor, his wounds sealing up neatly. You, hide in your cell in case any others turn up, she instructed, donning her shield and rushing into the fray deeper into the room. Warg snarls and bear roars and spider chitters filled the air between the yelps and battle cries of goblins lashing out at anything with more than 2 legs. Simon seemed almost casual in his spellcasting, firing off icy beams and bone-chilling rakes of spectral hands without concern for whether he was striking warg or goblin. As one of the zealot guards was pulled to the ground, dead by a shimmering skeletal hand, however, one of his comrades pointed a jagged blade at Simon. Traitor! The goblin snarled, rushing towards Simon with his bloody blade held high. A colorful blur caught Simon's attention as Astarion vaulted over the handrail and dropped onto the charging goblin, his daggers hilt deep in goblin flesh. I do love watching you work, Simon remarked. It's an honest living for once, Astarion winked, yanking the blades out and sampling the blood. He pulled a face immediately. Ugh, lesson learned, he said with a titter. The spider, 8 eyes rolling madly in its hairy head, spun about and aimed its spinnerets towards the remaining scrum, firing out a goopy, greyish fluid that began fraying into runny strands almost immediately. Karlak's eyes went wide as she caught a mouthful of freshly formed spider silk. Ugh! Ugh! She spat, the heat of her tongue quickly crisping and shrinking the webbing into something that was at least spittable. The goblins and wargs were not so lucky, swiping and gnashing their teeth at the webs as reams of the stuff gathered and looped. Not so long ago, webs couldn't hold Karlak at all with her hellish flames. Now they at least found temporary purchase before falling away. Shall we end the charade? Simon smirked, the vile miasma of the air beginning to coalesce around the skull atop Simon's staff. He slammed the end of the staff into the floor before him, and the jaw of the skull opened, spewing a jet of putrid bile towards the remaining goblins and the final surviving warg. The fluids in their bodies quickly began to evacuate through whatever means available. Ears, noses, throats, open wounds, leaving desiccated and soiled corpses and beast carcasses. "Oh, sick!" Karlak cried, retreating from the mess with a grin. "I really don't like this stuff," Simon said, looking slightly green around the gills as the skull's mouth closed once again, its empty sockets seeming to regard him maliciously. "Glad Ethel didn't have it with her, at least." The bear chuffed and reared up onto its hind legs, its eyes beginning to shine with golden-green light. With a flash, the bear was no more. In its place stood a mountain of a man, nearly 7 feet tall and as thickly muscled as the bear before. His shoulders were broad and stout, his chest deep, his hands worn rough from centuries of use. And to Simon's surprise, a pair of long, elven ears poked through his shaggy brown hair. His face bore elven youthfulness, but primal tattoos and the scars of living truly wild had left their marks, along with lines from both laughter and loss.
"Pardon the viscera,"
the man said, his voice deep and ringing, a smile coming easily to his features.
"One should treasure all of nature's gifts, but goblin guts may be an exception."
Simon realized after a too long moment that he was staring, and swallowed roughly.
"Are you Halsin,
Archdruid of the Emerald Grove?" he asked, his mouth finally cooperating and his cheeks flushed with embarrassment.
"Indeed I am, and well met,"
he said, wiping his hand on his leathers before offering it in greeting. His thick brows furrowed, and a touch of concern entered his rich brown eyes.
"I know we are in a less than ideal setting, but are you feeling all right? Please, allow me. I am a healer," he added, a wave of soothing golden light pouring from his palm.
The sensation was calming, like the touch of warm sunlight. All of Simon's life he'd either been healed by physicians and alchemists or by his own divine magic, forced to take the shape of something restorative against its very nature. It was something similar from Shadowheart, the darkness and shadow knitting all of their wounds closed begrudgingly. Abderek's healing had been exquisite, like having his skin pierced and laced shut with silk ribbon, but had been dark all the same. Was this what healing was supposed to feel like? He heard a quick intake of breath from Halsin and the light faded.
"Oak Father preserve you, child," Halsin murmured. "You've been infected with the Mind Flayer's spawn. But something is different about you. You're aware of the monster inside you. You don't bend to its will like the true souls, do you? In spite of that little performance you put on earlier."
"Correct," Simon nodded. "Our current understanding—" He paused, glancing over at Shadowheart for a moment before returning his attention to Halsin— "is that an artifact in our possession is keeping our wits secure. Ourselves and the rest of our group had a shared experience of something attempting to take control of our minds, only for this artifact to keep the intrusion at bay." Simon reached into his bag and withdrew the strange object, which seemed to be humming softly and emitting a much more active glow.
"This is quite alien to me," Halsin remarked. "As alien as the Mind Flayers themselves. Where did you find such a thing?"
"That is none of your business,"
Shadowheart interjected, taking a step forward.
"I only ask because it may be relevant. It may be some sort of control device, connected to the enchantments that have been placed on these tadpoles," Halsin said.
"Enchantment?" Simon asked, his attention immediately focused as he returned the artifact to its place in his pack.
"Indeed. After Nettie and I were attacked, we were able to inspect the corpse. And the creature that slithered out," Halsin added with distaste. "I was able to learn quite a bit. These Mind Flayer tadpoles have been modified. How so, I do not know, so I cannot cure you. But I can offer the next best thing. Where they came from. Moonrise Towers. It's where the cultists are taking their prisoners. Innocents go in, and true souls come out."
"I've never been there," Karlak said. "I was infected when I stowed away on that Nautiloid."
"I was infected on the ship too," Shadowheart remarked. "We were captured while we were stealing that artifact," she added, sour that she had to reveal anything more.
"I haven't been near Moonrise Towers in a few centuries, and I definitely picked up this little infection more recently than that," Astarion said.
Simon opened his mouth to chime in, but hesitated for a moment.
I remember heading out to the shops, and then waking up on the ship in one of those pods,"
Simon explained, gesturing an egg-like shape in the air in front of him.
"Perhaps in the chaos I was knocked out? But I've never been to Moonrise Towers." "Then it seems likely that Nautiloid ship departed from there, carrying these altered tadpoles with it," Halsin reasoned. "Their cult is spreading, and it's spreading through these tadpoles. If you want to find a cure, you must head to Moonrise and discover how they're being manipulated."
"You seem to know quite a lot about this," Simon said, resting his staff in the crook of his arm. "Will you accompany us to Moonrise? We could use your expertise."
"I'd love to, but there's still work I've yet to finish. Blood I've yet to spill," he growled, looking at the goblin corpses. "If we help each other in destroying this army, then I'll be free to join you on your journey to Moonrise. But I cannot allow these butchers to threaten my grove."
"There's trouble within, too. Korga was conspiring with shadow druids to seal the grove with some dark ritual," Simon added gravely. "We managed to stop her for now, but—"
"Korga?"
Halsin asked, eyes widening slightly for a moment.
"I should have known. She's young and naive. She's never learned to fear the shadows, but outsiders instead."
How long were you gone that someone was able to influence her? Shadowheart asked, frowning.
"Not more than a 10-day. Though it's hard to tell time in a place such as this," he added, gesturing to the stone walls and ceiling.
"Sounds to me like the snake's been in the grass a while, then," Karlak said. "No offense to snakes, Mortimer's great," she added quickly.
"We can save this discussion for a later time. Right now, this cult is threatening the natural order. If we remove their true soul leadership, then nature will cure itself," he said, his voice heavy with implication. "That is our current plan, although it appears we may have to make some alterations to our timeline now," Simon remarked, glancing at the pile of goblin corpses. "The other members of our party are currently at the grove, marshalling our allies so we can bring the fight here when the leadership is dealt with." "Yeah, there's folks from Elturel there, but now there's Flaming Fists and some other adventuresome types who were kept prisoner by a hag for who knows how long, probably itching for a fight. I know I would be." Karlak grinned. "Then I too shall lead our warriors in the battle to come." Halsin nodded. "The grove will rally to me." "I'll inform them of your approach. You can be something more subtle than a bear, correct?" Simon asked, smiling wryly. "I shall do my best," Halsin replied, giving him a knowing smile before transforming into a rat, very similar to the others they'd seen in the temple, save for the scars over the left eye. With a squeak, Halsin scurried off into the dark. Astarion stepped back, grimacing at the sight. Simon reached for his earring, brushing it delicately. "Gale, Will, we've found Halsin and freed him. He's on his way to the grove now to take back control and rally their forces." "Excellent work!" Gale's voice returned over the earring. "We've engaged some goblins sooner than we'd anticipated. The leadership is confirmed to be here, and many of the goblins in the camp are drinking or already drunk," Simon explained. "There are drow warriors inside the temple who may be more difficult to manage." "Help. Please," one of the prisoners begged softly. "Ah, damn. There are still prisoners being held here," Simon added. "They'll need healing. We can stabilize them, but not much more than that if we hope to get any of us out alive." "How do you suggest we keep the goblins from finding our handiwork?" Astarion asked, glancing back at the pile of corpses. Shadowheart glanced around the space quickly before reaching out to unlock one of the cells, wincing at the pain in her hand. "Come on, you lot," she said, gritting her teeth. "Go grab some of those weapons and be ready to defend yourselves. Once we leave, bar the door from the inside. We'll send someone when the coast is clear." "Probably a druid who can slither under the door," Simon advised, "so don't kill any mice or rats you see coming in." Karlak provided most of the muscle for shutting the door once again, and it appeared that the crypt beyond was clear. They waited until they heard something heavy slot into the far side of the door. Am I rubbing off on you?" Simon asked Shadowheart with a bit of a smile.
"What?" she asked.
"Freeing those captives," Simon prompted. "I don't think I'd have expected that from you."
"Oh, well," she said, rubbing the back of her hand self-consciously. "I suppose you might be. Just a little. You did free me from my pod, after all."
"Ah, yes, you're all being very noble. Now let's cut the head off this serpent and be gone." Astarion huffed, heading for the rickety ladder leading up and out of the crypt.